Rich Dad's Conspiracy of the Rich, The 8 New Rules of Money. Written by Robert T. Kiyosaki. Read by Dave Mallow. Featuring a special introduction by the author.
Hi, this is Robert Kiyosaki, and this is the introduction to Conspiracy of the Rich. Back in 1983, I began to see this crisis occurring. You see, this crisis is not a recent event. It has been occurring and reoccurring for hundreds of years. This crisis occurs every time the rich and the powerful attempt to manipulate the money supply and our government. One way they manipulate our lives is via our money supply, today known as the Federal Reserve Bank, and the government, specifically the U.S. Treasury. So again, this crisis is not a recent phenomenon. It has been going on for years. The problem is the people and organizations who caused the crisis, as well as profit from this crisis, are still in charge. In fact, they're the ones who have been asked to change this crisis. While they promise to make changes, I somehow doubt they will change. Another point before beginning, this book is about a conspiracy. Now, many people think that's something sinister and all that. I really don't hold it as sinister or something evil. I just hold it as greed and self-interest. And rather than trying to change the greedy and the self-interested, I think it's best to change myself. Because one of the best definitions of the word crisis I have ever heard is simply this: crisis is change screaming to occur. I'll say it again. Crisis is change screaming to occur. Now, the question is, are our leaders going to change, or are you and I going to change? This book is about you and I, and what are we going to do to make changes during this crisis? So again, this book is not really about the conspiracy, but this book is about financial education and educating you and I so we don't become victims of this economic crisis. And as you know, there are millions, possibly billions of people who are severely financially damaged because of this crisis. Unfortunately, our leaders think the way to solve this problem is to give people more money, either through bailouts or through welfare or stimulus plans. This goes against what I learned in Sunday school about giving people fish versus teaching people to fish. So this book, The Conspiracy of the Rich, is about teaching people to fish. This book is broken into 2 parts. One part is about the past. Why the past is important is because through history we can see the future. And what you'll see that this crisis has occurred many, many times before. This is not a new event. The only problem is the crises before were measured in millions of dollars, then billions of dollars, and today they're measured in trillions of dollars. And the problem gets bigger simply because we let history repeat itself. And you know that old saying, insanity is doing the same thing and expecting things to change. Well, this crisis is definitely economic insanity, led by the same people that caused the crisis. So the first part of the book is about what got us into this crisis, and the second part of this book, part 2, is about what you and I can do to not be victims of this crisis. And this book is really about the 8 new rules of money. And the reason the 8 new rules of money are important is because in 1971, President Richard Nixon, without permission of Congress or the U.S. people, took the U.S. dollar off the gold standard. When he took the dollar off the gold standard, our dollar was no longer backed by gold, it was backed by debt. This means to you and I the only way the economy could expand was if you and I and big businesses got further and further into debt. So ironically, the reason this crisis gets worse is because you and I are not getting into debt. So one of the 8 new rules of money is to learn how to use debt, because if you and I don't get back into debt, we go into a depression, guaranteed, simply because in 1971, President Nixon changed the rules of money for the world. There's one other change that occurred about the same time, and that was in 1974 when the U.S. Congress created an act called ERISA, Employee Retirement Income Security Act. Now, you and I know every time the government gets in to manage our security, we're going to have less and less security. That's why it's called Social Security, and that's also going broke. So in 1974, when ERISA came in, that meant all employees and many workers had to go into what's now known as a 401k in America, or IRAs, or SEPs, or KIOs, or superannuations, as they're called in Australia, or RRSPs, as they're called in Canada. In other words, after 1974, millions of workers were forced to become investors or gamblers in the stock market. And as we know, there's no financial education in our school. So that's why we have another crisis going on, is because you have millions of people who are hoping to retire by betting their future on one of the most risky of all investments, the stock market, a subject they don't know anything about. This is absolute insanity. On top of that, the people that are giving them investment advice are not really investors, they're really salespeople. So this is an example of changing the rules and why you and I need to change our own rules so we don't become victims to this entire global conspiracy of the rich. So that's an overview of what the conspiracy of the rich is about. Thank you for listening to The Conspiracy of the Rich.
Acknowledgements. My rich dad always said business and investing are team sports. The same can be said when writing a book. We have made history with Conspiracy of the Rich. As the first truly interactive online book in the Rich Dad series, I was in uncharted waters. Thankfully, I have a great team, and I relied on them often. Each one of them stepped up to the plate and delivered even beyond my expectations. Above all, thank you to my beautiful bride Kim for her encouragement and support. You've been with me along every step of our financial journey, both the good and not so good. You are my partner and my reason for success. Thank you to Jake Johnson of Elevate Consulting Company, elevatecompany.net, for his help in shaping the book and my thoughts, and for helping take it from an idea to a reality. Also, thanks to my editors, Rick Wolf and Leah Tricosis at Hachette, for their tireless efforts to make this project a success, and for taking a chance. Special thanks to Rhonda Shankirik of the Rich Dad Company and Rachel Pearson of Metaphor for their tireless efforts on the promotion of the book, and for the top-notch website that was home to it for so long. Much thanks to the Rich Dad team members who are in the trenches every day and who have persevered and stuck with Kim and me through thick and thin. You are the heartbeat of our organization. Part 1. The Conspiracy. The root of all evil. Is the love of money the root of all evil, or is the ignorance of money the root of all evil? What did you learn about money in school? Have you ever wondered why our school systems do not teach us much, if anything, about money? Is the lack of financial education in our schools simply an oversight by our educational leaders, or is it part of a larger conspiracy? Regardless, whether we are rich or poor, educated or uneducated, child or adult, retired or working, we all use money. Like it or not, money has a tremendous impact on our lives in today's world. To omit the subject of money from our educational system is cruel and unconscionable.
Reader comments.
If we don't wake up as a country and start taking responsibility for our own education and money matters and teach that to our children, we are in for a train wreck of catastrophic proportions. Catherine Morgan.
I went to high school and junior high school in Florida and Oklahoma. I received no financial education. I was, however, forced to take woodshop and metal shop. Wayne Porter.
Changing the rules of money. In 1971, President Richard Nixon changed the rules of money. Without the approval of Congress, he severed the U.S. dollar's relationship with gold. He made this unilateral decision during a quietly held 2-day meeting on Minot Island in Maine, without consulting his State Department or the international monetary system. President Nixon changed the rules because foreign countries being paid in U.S. dollars grew skeptical because the U.S. Treasury was printing more and more money to cover our debts. and they began exchanging their dollars directly for gold in earnest, depleting most of the U.S. gold reserves. The vault was being emptied because the government was importing more than it was exporting, and because of the costly Vietnam War. As our economy grew, we were also importing more and more oil. In everyday terms, America was going bankrupt. We were spending more than we earned. The United States could not pay its bills as long as our bills were to be paid in gold. By freeing the dollar from gold and making it illegal to directly exchange dollars for gold, Nixon created a way for the U.S. to print its way out of debt. In 1971, the world's rules of money were changed, and the biggest economic boom in the history of the world began. The boom continued as long as the world accepted our funny money, money backed by nothing but a promise by U.S. taxpayers to pay the bills of the United States. Thanks to Nixon's change in the rules of money, inflation took off. The party was on. As more and more money was printed each decade, the value of the dollar decreased, and the prices of goods and assets went up. Even middle-class Americans became millionaires as home prices kept climbing. They received credit cards in the mail. Money was flowing freely. To pay off their credit cards, people used their homes as ATMs. After all, houses always went up in value, right? Blinded by greed and easy credit, however, many people either didn't see or ignored the dire warning signs such a system created. In 2007, a new term crept into our vocabulary: subprime borrower, a person who borrowed money to buy a house he could not afford. At first, people thought the problem of subprime borrowers was limited to poor, financially foolish individuals who dreamed of owning their own home. Or they thought it was limited to speculators trying to make a quick buck. Flippers. Even Republican presidential candidate John McCain did not take the crisis seriously in late 2008, trying to reassure everyone by saying, "The fundamentals of our economy are strong." Around the same time, another word crept into our daily conversation: bailout, saving our biggest banks from the same problems that faced subprime borrowers: too much debt and not enough cash. As the financial crisis spread, millions of people lost their jobs, their homes, their savings, their college funds, and their retirements. Those who so far have not lost anything are afraid they might be next. Even states felt the pinch. California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger began talking about issuing IOUs instead of paychecks for government lawmakers, because California, one of the biggest economies in the world, was going broke. Now, with 2009 underway, the world looks to a newly elected president, Barack Obama, for salvation. A cash heist. In 1983, I read a book by Buckminster Fuller entitled Grunch of Giants. The word grunch is an acronym standing for Gross Universe Cash Heist. It is a book about the super rich and uber powerful, and how they have been stealing from and exploiting people for centuries. It is a book about a conspiracy of the rich. Grunch of Giants moves from kings and queens of thousands of years ago to modern times. It explains how the rich and powerful have always dominated the masses. It also explains that modern-day bank robbers do not wear masks. Rather, they wear suits and ties, sport college degrees, and rob banks from the inside, not the outside. After reading Grunch of Giants so many years ago, I could see our current financial crisis coming. I just did not know exactly when it would arrive. One reason why my investments and business ventures do well, in spite of this economic crisis, is because I read Grunch of Giants. The book gave me time to prepare for this crisis. Books about conspiracies are often written by someone from the fringe. Dr. R. Buckminster Fuller, although ahead of his time in terms of his thinking, was hardly a fringe person. He attended Harvard University, and although he didn't graduate from there, he did quite well, like another famous Harvard dropout, Bill Gates. The American Institute of Architects honors Fuller as one of the country's greatest architects and designers. He is considered to be among the most accomplished Americans in history, having a substantial number of patents to his name. He was a respected futurist, an inspiration for John Denver's lyric, "Grandfather of the Future," in his song, "What One Man Can Do." Fuller was an environmentalist before most people knew what the word meant. But most of all, he is respected because he used his genius to work for a world that benefited everyone, not just himself or the rich and powerful. I read a number of Dr. Fuller's books before reading Grunch of Giants. The problem for me was that most of his earlier books were on math and science. Those books went right over my head. But Grunch of Giants, I understood. Reading Grunch of Giants confirmed many of my unspoken suspicions regarding the way the world worked. I began to understand why we do not teach kids about money in school. I also knew why I was sent to Vietnam to fight a war we should never have fought. Simply put, war is profitable. War is often about greed, not patriotism. After 9 years in the military, 4 attending a federal military academy, and 5 as a Marine Corps pilot who served in Vietnam twice, I could only agree with Dr. Fuller. I understood, from first-hand experience, why he refers to the CIA as capitalism's invisible army. The best thing about Grunch of Giants was that it awakened the student in me. For the first time in my life, I wanted to study a subject. The subject of how the rich and powerful exploit the rest of us legally. Since 1983, I have studied and read over 50 books on this subject. In each book, I found 1 or 2 pieces of the puzzle. The book you are listening to now will put those many puzzle pieces together. Is there a conspiracy? Conspiracy theories are a dime a dozen. We have all heard them. There are conspiracy theories about who killed Presidents Lincoln and Kennedy, and about who killed Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. There are also conspiracy theories about September 11, 2001. Those theories will never die. Theories are theories. They are based on suspicions and unanswered questions. I did not write Conspiracy of the Rich to sell you another conspiracy theory. My research has convinced me that there have been many conspiracies of the rich, both in the past and the present, and there will be more conspiracies in the future. When money and power are at stake, there will always be conspiracies. Money and power will always cause people to commit corrupt acts. In 2008, for instance, Bernard Madoff was accused of running a $50 billion Ponzi scheme to defraud not only wealthy clients, but also schools, charities, and pension funds. He once held the highly respected position of head of NASDAQ. He did not need more money, yet he has allegedly been stealing it for years from very smart people and worthy organizations dependent upon competence in financial markets. Another example of the corruption of money and power is spending over $500 million to be elected the President of the United States, a job that pays only $400,000. Spending money like that on an election is not healthy for our country. So has there been a conspiracy? I believe so, in a way. But the question is, so what? What are you and I going to do about it? Most of the people who caused this latest financial crisis are dead, yet their work lives on. Arguing with dead people would be rather futile. Regardless of whether there is a conspiracy, there are certain circumstances and events that impact your life in profound and unseen ways. Let's look at financial education, for instance. I've often marveled at the lack of financial education in our modern school system. At best, our children are taught how to balance a checkbook, speculate in the stock market, save money in banks, and invest in a retirement plan for the long term. In other words, they are taught to turn their money over to the rich, who supposedly have their best interest at heart. Every time an educator brings a banker or a financial planner into their classroom, supposedly in the name of financial education, they are actually allowing the fox to enter the henhouse. I am not saying bankers and financial planners are bad people. All I am saying is that they are agents of the rich and powerful. Their job is not to educate, but to recruit future customers. That is why they preach the doctrine of saving your money and investing in mutual funds. It helps the bank, not you. Again, I reiterate, this is not bad. It's good business for the bank. It is no different than Army and Marine recruiters coming on campus when I was in high school and selling students on the glory of serving our country. One of the causes of this financial crisis is that most people do not know good financial advice from bad financial advice. Most people cannot tell a good financial advisor from a con man. Most people cannot tell a good investment from a bad one. Most people go to school so they can get a good job, work hard, pay taxes, buy a house, save money, and turn over any extra money to a financial planner or an expert like Bernie Madoff. Most people leave school not knowing even the basic differences between a stock and a bond, between debt and equity. Few know why preferred stocks are labeled preferred and why mutual funds are mutual, or the difference between a mutual fund, hedge fund, exchange-traded fund, and a fund of funds. Many people think debt is bad, yet debt can make you rich. Debt can increase your return on investment, but only if you know what you're doing. Only if you know the difference between capital gains and cash flow, and which is less risky. Most people blindly accept the idea of going to school to get a good job and never know why employees pay higher tax rates than the entrepreneur who owns the business. Many people are in trouble today because they believe their home was an asset, when it was really a liability. These are basic and simple financial concepts. Yet for some reason our schools conveniently omit a subject required for a successful life, the subject of money. In 1903, John D. Rockefeller created the General Education Board. It seems this was done to ensure a steady supply of employees who are always financially in need of money, a job, and job security. There is evidence that Rockefeller was influenced by the Prussian system of education, a system designed to produce good employees and good soldiers, people who dutifully follow orders, such as do this or be fired, or turn your money over to me for safekeeping and I'll invest it for you. Regardless of whether this was Rockefeller's intent in creating the General Education Board, the result today is that even those with a good education and a secure job are feeling financially insecure. Without a basic financial education, long-term financial security is almost impossible. In 2008, millions of American baby boomers began retiring at a rate of 10,000 a day, expecting the government to take care of them financially and medically. Today, many people are finally learning that job security does not ensure long-term financial security. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was created, even though the Founding Fathers, creators of the U.S. Constitution, were very much against a national bank that controlled the money supply. Without proper financial education, few people know that the Federal Reserve is not federal or American. It has no reserves, and it is not a bank. Once the Fed was in place, there were two sets of rules when it came to money. One set of rules for people who work for money, and another set of rules for the rich who print money. In 1971, when President Nixon took the United States off the gold standard, the conspiracy of the rich was complete. The rules of money were completely changed and heavily tilted in favor of the rich and powerful. The biggest financial boom in the history of the world began, and today, in 2009, that boom has busted.
Reader comment.
I remember when they stopped backing our money with gold. Inflation went crazy. I was only a teenager and had gotten my first job. Things I needed back then I had to buy myself. Price of goods went up, but not my parents' paychecks. The discussions of the adults revolved around how this could have happened. They felt that this could be the downfall of our whole economic system. It took a while, but here it is. C.A. Gosnell.
What can I do? As mentioned, the conspiracy of the rich has created two sets of rules when it comes to money: old rules of money and new rules of money. One set of rules is for the rich, and another set is for ordinary people. The people who are most worried by our current financial crisis are those playing by the old set of rules. If you want to feel more secure about your future, you need to know the new set of rules, the 8 new rules of money. This audiobook will teach you those rules and how to use them to your advantage. Following are 2 examples of old rules of money versus new rules of money. Old rule: save money. After 1971, the U.S. dollar was no longer money, but rather a currency, something I talk about in my book, Rich Dads Increase Your Financial IQ. As a consequence, savers became losers. The U.S. government was allowed to print money faster than it could be saved. When a banker raves about the power of compounding interest, what he or she fails to also tell you about is the power of compounding inflation, or in today's crisis, the power of compounding deflation. Inflation and deflation are caused by governments and banks attempting to control the economy by printing and lending money out of thin air. That is, without anything of value backing the money other than the full faith and credit of the United States. For years, people all across the globe have believed that U.S. bonds are the safest investment in the world. For years, savers dutifully bought U.S. bonds, believing that was the smart thing to do. At the start of 2009, 30-year U.S. Treasury bonds are paying less than 3% interest. To me, this means that there is too much funny money in the world, savers will be losers, and in 2009, U.S. bonds could be the riskiest of all investments. If you don't understand why that is, don't worry. Most people don't, which is why financial education, or the lack thereof, in our schools is so important. This subject of money, bonds, and debt will be covered more fully later in the audiobook, unlike in your high school economics class. It is worth knowing, however, that what used to be the safest investments, U.S. bonds, are now the riskiest. New rule: spend, don't save. Today, most people spend a lot of time learning how to earn money. They go to school to get a high-paying job, and then they spend years working at that job to earn money. They then do their best to save it. In the new rules, it is more important that you know how to spend your money, not just earn or save it. In other words, people who spend their money wisely will always be more prosperous than those who save their money wisely. Of course, by spending, I mean invest or convert your money into long-lasting value. The rich understand that in today's economy you cannot become wealthy by sticking your money under a mattress, or even worse, in a bank. They know that the key to wealth is investing in cash-flowing assets. Today, you need to know how to spend your money on assets that retain their value, provide income, adjust for inflation, and go up in value, not down. This will be covered in more detail throughout this audiobook. Old rule: diversify. The old rule of diversification tells you to buy a number of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. Diversification, however, did not protect investors from a 30% plunge in the stock market and losses in their mutual funds. I thought it odd that many of the so-called investment gurus, people who sang the praises of diversification, began shouting, "Sell, sell, sell," as the market fell. If diversification protected you, why sell all of a sudden at near market bottom? As Warren Buffett says, wide diversification is only required when investors do not understand what they are doing. In the end, diversification is a zero-sum game at best. If you are evenly diversified, when one asset class goes down, the other goes up. You lose money in one place and make it in another, but you don't gain any ground. You are static. Meanwhile, inflation, a topic we will also discuss in detail later in the audiobook, marches on. Rather than diversify, wise investors focus and specialize. They get to know the investment category they invest in and how the business works better than anyone else. For example, when investing in real estate, some people specialize in raw land and others in apartment buildings. While both are investing in real estate, they are doing so in totally different business categories. When investing in stocks, I invest in businesses that pay a steady dividend, cash flow. For example, today I am investing in businesses that operate oil pipelines. After the stock market crash of 2008, the share prices of these companies dropped, making the cash flow dividends bargains. In other words, bad markets offer great opportunities if you know what you are investing in. Smart investors understand that owning a business that adjusts to the ups and downs of the economy or investing in cash-flowing assets is much better than owning a diversified portfolio of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, investments that crash when the market crashes. New rule: control and focus your money. Don't diversify. Take control of your money and focus your investments. During this financial crisis, I took a few hits, but my wealth remained intact. That is because my wealth is not dependent upon market values going up or down, aka capital gains. I invest almost exclusively for cash flow. For example, my cash flow decreased a little when the price of oil came down, yet my wealth is strong because I still receive a check in the mail every quarter. Even though the price of the oil stocks, capital gains, came down, I'm not worried because I receive cash flow from my investment. I don't have to worry about selling my stocks to realize a profit. The same is true with most of my real estate investments. I invest for cash flow in real estate, which means every month I receive checks. Passive income. The people who are hurting today are real estate investors who invested for capital gains, also known as flipping properties. In other words, since most people invested for capital gains, counting on the price of their stock investments or their home to go up in price, they are in trouble today. When I was a boy, my rich dad would play the game of Monopoly over and over again with his son and me. By playing the game, I learned the difference between cash flow and capital gains. For example, if I owned a property with one green house on it, I got paid $10 a month in rent. If I had 3 houses on the same property, I received $50 a month in rent. And the ultimate goal was to have one red hotel on the same property. To win at the game of Monopoly, you had to invest for cash flow, not capital gains. Knowing the difference between cash flow and capital gains at the age of 9 was one of the most important lessons my rich dad taught me. In other words, financial education can be as simple as a fun game and can provide financial security for generations, even during a financial crisis. Today, I do not need job security because I have financial security. The difference between financial security and financial panic can be as simple as knowing the difference between capital gains and cash flow. The problem is that investing for cash flow requires a higher degree of financial intelligence than investing for capital gains. Being smarter about investing for cash flow will be covered in greater detail later in this audiobook. But for now, just remember this. It is easier to invest for cash flow during a financial crisis. So don't waste a good crisis by hiding your head in the sand. The longer this crisis lasts, the richer some people will become. I want you to be one of them. Today, one of the new rules is to focus your mind and money rather than to diversify. It pays to focus on cash flow rather than capital gains because the more you know how to control cash flow, the more your capital gains increase, and so does your financial security. You might even become rich. It's basic financial education taught in the game of Monopoly and my educational game Cash Flow, which has been called Monopoly on steroids. These 2 new rules, learn to spend rather than save, and focus rather than diversify, are just 2 of the 8 new rules that will be covered in this audiobook, and they will be covered in more detail in future chapters. The point of Conspiracy of the Rich is to open your eyes to the power you have to control your financial future if you have the proper financial education. Our educational system has failed millions of people, even the educated. There is evidence that our financial system has conspired against you and others. But that is ancient history. Today, you control your future, and now is the time to educate yourself, to teach yourself the new rules of money. By doing so, you take control of your destiny and hold the key to playing the game of money according to its new rules.
Reader comment.
I think most people who are reading your books are looking for some sort of magic pill solution, because that is the mindset of society in America today, with their instant gratification desires. And I think you do a good job of letting people know that this is not a magic pill book. When you discuss the new rules of money, what you say is excellent in reshaping people's minds and how they should think. A.P. Cordove.
My promise to you. After President Nixon changed the rules of money in 1971, the subject of money became very confusing. The subject of money does not make sense to most honest people. In fact, the more honest and hard-working you are, the less sense the new rules will make. For example, the new rules allow the rich to print their own money. If you did that, you would be sent to jail for counterfeiting. But in this audiobook, I will describe how I print my own money legally. Printing your own money is one of the great secrets of the truly rich. My promise to you is that I will do my very best to keep my explanations as simple as possible. I will do my best to use everyday language to explain complex financial jargon. For example, one of the reasons why there is a financial crisis today is because of a financial tool known as a derivative. Warren Buffett once called derivatives weapons of mass destruction, and his description proved true. Derivatives are bringing down the biggest banks in the world. The problem is that very few people know what derivatives are. To keep things very simple, I explain derivatives by using the example of an orange and orange juice. Orange juice is a derivative of an orange, just like gasoline is a derivative of oil, or an egg is a derivative of a chicken. It's that simple. If you buy a house, a mortgage is a derivative of you and the house you buy. One of the reasons we are in this financial crisis is because the bankers of the world began creating derivatives out of derivatives out of derivatives. Some of these new derivatives had exotic names, such as collateralized debt obligations, or high-yield corporate bonds, aka junk bonds, and credit default swaps. In this audiobook, I will do my best to define these words by using everyday language. Remember, one of the objectives of the financial industry is to keep people confused. Multi-layered derivatives border on legal fraud of the highest order. They are no different than someone using a credit card to pay off a credit card and then refinancing their home with a new mortgage, paying off their credit cards, and using the credit cards all over again. That's why Warren Buffett called derivatives weapons of mass destruction. Multi-layered derivatives are destroying the world's banking system, just as credit cards and home equity loans are destroying many families. Credit cards, money, collateralized debt obligations, junk bonds, and mortgages. They're all derivatives, just going by different names. In 2007, when the house of derivatives began coming down, the richest people in the world began screaming bailout. A bailout is used when the rich want the taxpayers to pay for their mistakes or their fraud. My research has found that a bailout is an integral part of the conspiracy of the rich. One of the reasons I believe my book Rich Dad, Poor Dad is the best-selling personal finance book of all time is because I kept financial jargon simple. I will do my best to do the same in this audiobook. A wise man once said, "Simplicity is genius." To keep things simple, I will not go into excessive detail or complex explanations. I will use real-life stories rather than technical explanations to make my point. If you want more detail, I will list a number of books that explain subjects covered here in greater depth. For example, Dr. Fuller's book, Grunch of Giants, might be a good book to read. Simplicity is important because there are many people who profit from the subject of money being kept complex and confusing. It's easier to take your money if you're confused. So I ask again, is the love of money the root of all evil? I say no. I believe it is more evil to keep people in the dark, ignorant about the subject of money. Evil occurs when people are ignorant of how money works, and financial ignorance is an essential component of the conspiracy of the rich.
Reader comments.
I went to Wharton and am embarrassed to say that nothing in my course of study explained wealth creation this clearly. Everyone should read Conspiracy of the Rich and all of Robert's books starting in high school. R. Romatowski.
Robert, I would say yes, the love of money is the root of all evil, for the same reason you say no. The evil of keeping the masses in ignorance about money is just a derivative of the evil love of money. L. Starcher.
Chapter 1. Can Obama Save the World? Timeline of a Crisis. In August 2007, panic silently spread throughout the world. The banking system was seizing up. This set in motion a domino effect that threatens even now to bring down the entire world economy. In spite of massive government bailouts and stimulus packages estimated to be over $7 trillion to $9 trillion worldwide, some of the world's biggest banking and business institutions, such as Citigroup and General Motors, continue to wobble. Their long-term survival is in question. The crisis threatens not only major corporations and multinational banking conglomerates, but also the security of hard-working families. Today, millions of people who thought they were doing the right thing by following the conventional wisdom of going to school, getting a job, buying a home, saving money, staying free of debt, and investing in a diversified portfolio of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, are in financial trouble. In talking with people around the country, I find that they are concerned and scared, and a number of people are suffering personal depressions after losing their jobs, homes, savings, kids' college savings, and retirement funds. Many don't understand what is happening to our economy or how it will eventually affect them. Many wonder what caused this crisis, asking, is anyone to blame? Who can solve the problem? And when will the crisis end? With that in mind, I think it's important to spend a moment reviewing the events leading up to our current crisis. The following is a brief and by no means comprehensive timeline, highlighting some of the major global economic events that have led us to the precarious financial state we find ourselves in today. August 6, 2007. American Home Mortgage, AIG, one of America's largest mortgage providers, filed for bankruptcy. August 9, 2007. French bank BNP Paribas, because of problems with U.S. subprime mortgages, announced it couldn't value assets worth over 1.6 billion euros. As global credit markets locked up, the European Central Bank injected nearly 95 billion euros into the Eurozone banking system in an effort to stimulate lending and liquidity. August 10, 2007. A day later, the European Central Bank pumped another 61 billion euros into global capital markets. August 13, 2007. The European Central Bank released another 47.6 billion euros, the third cash infusion totaling almost 204 billion euros in a span of 3 working days. September 2007. Northern Rock, the largest mortgage broker and a large consumer bank in Britain, experienced a run on the bank by depositors. It was the first bank run in over 100 years. The presidential campaign heats up. As the financial crisis spread around the world in 2007, the U.S. presidential campaign, which was to be the longest and most expensive political campaign in history, picked up steam. During the early part of the campaign, even though there were clear signs that the world economy was on the verge of collapsing, the major presidential candidates rarely mentioned the economy as an issue. Rather, the hot campaign topics were the war in Iraq, gay marriage, abortion, and immigration. When the candidates did discuss the economy, they did so dismissively. This was no more apparent than when presidential candidate John McCain later famously remarked in late 2008, "The fundamentals of our economy are strong," as the Dow dropped a record 504 points that day. In the face of all the evidence of a mounting major financial crisis, where was our president? Where were our leading presidential candidates and financial leaders? Why were the media darlings of the financial world not warning investors to get out? Why were financial experts still encouraging investors to invest for the long term? Why were our political and financial leaders not sounding the warning call about this financial storm? Why didn't they at least have the wisdom to stand up and say, "It's the economy, stupid"? To quote a famous song, they were blinded by the light. On the surface, everything seemed fine, as evidenced by the next event in our timeline. October 9, 2007. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed at a historic high of 14,164. A year later. September 2008. President Bush and the U.S. Treasury asked for $700 billion in bailout money to save the economy, over a year after the European Central Bank had already infused 204 billion euros into the economy in August 2007, and almost a year after the Dow hit its all-time high. Toxic financial derivatives resulted in the collapse of Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, and the nationalization of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and one of the world's largest insurers, AIG. Additionally, the U.S. auto industry revealed that it was ailing, and GM, Ford, and Chrysler asked for bailout money. Many states and city governments were also now asking for bailout money. September 29, 2008. On a Black Monday after President Bush asked for bailout money, the Dow plunged 777 points. It was the biggest single-day point-based drop in history, and the Dow closed at 10,365. October 1, 2008 through October 10, 2008. In one of its worst spans ever recorded, the Dow dropped 2,380 points in a little over a week. October 13, 2008. The Dow began to exhibit extreme volatility, going up 936 points in one day, the best point gain in history, closing at 9,387. October 15, 2008. The Dow plunged 733 points, closing at 8,577. October 28, 2008. The Dow gained 889 points, the second best point gain in history, closing at 9,065. November 4, 2008. Barack Obama was elected President of the United States with the campaign slogan, "Change we can believe in." He will take over a government that has by now committed $7.8 trillion in various forms to salvage the economy. December 2008. It was reported that Americans lost 584,000 jobs in November, the biggest posted loss since December 1974. Unemployment was reported at a 15-year high of 6.7%, with nearly 2 million jobs lost in the United States alone in 2008. Additionally, it was reported that China, the world's fastest-growing economy, lost 6.7 million jobs in 2008, an indication that the global economy was in severe distress and on the verge of meltdown. Economists finally admitted the U.S. economy had been in a recession since December 2007. 1 year later, the economists finally figured it out. Warren Buffett, whom many consider the world's smartest investor, saw his company, Berkshire Hathaway, lose 33% of its stock value in a year. Investors took solace in the fact that the fund outperformed the market by losing less than the average. That's comforting. Yale and Harvard University announced their endowment funds lost over 20% in a year. GM and Chrysler received $17.4 billion in government loans. President-elect Obama announced an $800 billion stimulus plan centered on massive infrastructure projects aimed at easing the record U.S. job losses. This is in addition to the $7.8 trillion already committed by the U.S. government. December 31, 2008. The Dow closed at 8,776, down 5,388 points from its record high achieved just over a year earlier. It was the worst yearly performance for the Dow since 1931 and equated to $6.9 trillion in lost value. Back to the future. Faced with such an overwhelmingly bad economy, President Bush pushed through a landmark bailout plan aimed at saving the economy, saying this legislation will safeguard and stabilize America's financial system and put in place permanent reforms so these problems will never happen again. Many people breathed a sigh of relief, thinking, finally, the government is going to save us. The problem is, those are not the words of President George W. Bush. Those are the words of his father, George H.W. Bush. In 1989, the first President Bush asked for $66 billion to save the savings and loan, S&L, industry. The $66 billion did not solve the problem. The S&L industry disappeared from sight. On top of that, the estimated $66 billion rescue package eventually cost taxpayers over $150 billion, more than twice the amount originally estimated. Where did all that money go? Like father, like son. 20 years later, in September 2008, President George W. Bush asked for $700 billion and made a similar promise. We'll make sure as time goes on this doesn't happen again. In the meantime, we gotta solve the problem. And that's why people sent me to Washington, D.C. Why is it that a father and son said almost the same thing about saving the economy, almost 20 years apart? Why was the first President Bush's promise to fix the system broken? All the President's Men. The main campaign slogan of President Barack Obama was, "Change we can believe in." Given that slogan, we must ask a question. Why did President Obama hire many of the same people who worked in the Clinton administration? That doesn't seem like change. It seems like status quo. During the election, why did Obama consult Robert Rubin, who just recently resigned as head of Citigroup, a company on the verge of its own collapse, and that has received some $45 billion in bailout funds, for advice on the economy? Why did he appoint Larry Summers to be director of the White House National Economic Council, and Timothy Geithner, former head of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, to be his Secretary of the Treasury? All of these men were members of the Clinton economic team and played a part in the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933, an act that forbade banks from selling investments. Banks selling investments in the form of derivatives is a big reason why we are in this mess today. In overly simple terms, the purpose of the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933, crafted during the last Depression, was to separate savings banks, which had access to Federal Reserve funds, from investment banks, which did not. Clinton, Rubin, Summers, and Geithner succeeded in repealing Glass-Steagall in order to legitimize the formation of Citigroup, the biggest financial supermarket in U.S. history. Many people do not know this, but at the time of its formation, Citigroup was in violation of the Glass-Steagall Act. The following is a comment Kenneth Gunther, CEO of Independent Community Bankers of America, the Small Bankers of America, made to PBS in 2003 about the formation of Citigroup. Who do they think they are? Other people, firms cannot act like this. Citicorp and Travelers were so big that they were able to pull this off. They were able to pull off the largest financial conglomeration, the largest financial coming together of banking, insurance, and securities, when legislation was still on the books saying this was illegal. And they pulled this off with the blessings of the President of the United States, President Clinton, the Chairman of the Federal Reserve System, Alan Greenspan, and the Secretary of the Treasury, Robert Rubin. And then, when it's all over, what happens? The Secretary of the Treasury becomes the Vice Chairman of the emerging Citigroup. The most telling line is the last one. The Secretary of the Treasury, Robert Rubin, becomes the Chairman of the emerging Citigroup. As we've discussed, Robert Rubin was Obama's advisor during the presidential campaign. President Obama's current Secretary of the Treasury is Timothy Geithner. He was Undersecretary of the Treasury from 1998 to 2001 under Treasury Secretaries Robert Rubin and Lawrence Summers. Summers is Geithner's mentor, and many call Geithner a Robert Rubin protege. Oh, what a tangled web we weave. In other words, these same men are partially responsible for triggering this financial crisis. By allowing the combining of savings banks with investment banks, these guys accelerated the sale of the exotic financial derivatives that Warren Buffett called weapons of mass financial destruction, and that have helped bring the entire global economy to its knees. How can there be change if the same people who expanded this financial mess remain in charge? What does President Obama mean when he promises change we can believe in? Republicans, Democrats, and bankers. One reason why Presidents Bush Sr. and Bush Jr. said almost the same words, that a bailout would save the economy and never happen again, is because they are elected to protect the system, not fix it. Could one reason why President Obama has hired virtually the same financial team from the Clinton administration be because he is interested in protecting the same system? A system designed to make the rich get even richer? Only time will tell. Although President Obama is proud of the fact that he did not accept campaign money from lobbyists, the truth remains that his financial team is full of insiders who helped usher in the crisis they are now charged with fixing. The only candidate who consistently mentioned the economy and the growing financial crisis during the early part of the 2008 presidential campaign was Representative Ron Paul of Texas, a true maverick Republican. Writing for Forbes.com on March 4, 2008, he stated, "Unless we embrace fundamental reforms, we will be caught in a financial storm that will humble this great country as no foreign enemy ever could." Unfortunately, not enough voters cared to listen.
Reader comments.
I voted for Obama because I believe he is a sincere and compassionate leader. And, no matter how intelligent he may be, or anyone working with him, you, Robert, have taught me to see that financial education in this country is scarce. I worry that the folks in charge simply do not have a very high financial IQ. Virtual Deb.
It seems that President Obama and his team are focused more on short-term tactical band-aids rather than long-term strategic goals. To date, all the actions taken by the new administration have been to plug the holes in the dike and shore it up a bit. There seems to be no attention to determining the underlying root cause and changing the foundation flaws that led to the current financial crisis. E. Grannon.
The roots of the crisis. It is said that Meyer Amschel Rothschild, founder of one of the most powerful banking families of Europe, once observed, "Give me control of the nation's money supply, and I care not who makes the laws." To understand today's financial crisis, it is important to understand the relationship between the U.S. government, the Federal Reserve System, and some of the most powerful people in the world. In 1913, the creation of the Federal Reserve System granted the very rich of the world the power to control the money supply of the United States, and fulfilled the spirit of Rothschild sentiments. Many people don't know or understand that the Federal Reserve System is not a government institution or a bank, nor does it have any reserves. Rather, it is a banking cartel run by some of the most powerful men in the financial world. The creation of the Fed was basically a license to print money. Another reason the Federal Reserve System was created was to protect the biggest banks from failing by providing liquidity to those banks when they were in financial trouble, which protected the wealth of the rich, not of the taxpayers. We see this in action even to this day. In 2008, when President Bush authorized $700 billion in bailout money, Secretary of the Treasury Henry Paulson, formerly of Goldman Sachs, in conjunction with the Federal Reserve, immediately handed out billions of dollars in TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program money, to the biggest banks in the country, his friends, no questions asked. The reality of the situation is that the TARP bailout money went straight from our pockets, taxpayers' pockets, into the pockets of the banks and corporations that helped create our financial mess in the first place. We were told the money was given to the banks with a mandate to lend it out, but our government was either unable or unwilling to enforce that mandate, or both. In mid-December 2008, when USA Today asked banks what they were doing with the bailout money, J.P. Morgan Chase, a bank that received $25 billion in taxpayer money, replied, "We have not disclosed that to the public. We're declining to." Morgan Stanley, a bank that received $10 billion, replied, "We are going to decline to comment on your story." The Bank of New York Mellon responded, "We're choosing not to disclose that." The bank bailout money was really just a rich friend bailout, employed to cover those friends' mistakes and obvious fraud, not to save the economy. The proof is in the pudding. As the Wall Street Journal reported on January 26, 2009 in an article entitled "Lending Drops at Big U.S. Banks," 10 of the 13 big beneficiaries of the Treasury Department's Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP, saw their outstanding loan balances decline by a total of about $46 billion. This is even as they scooped up $148 billion in taxpayer TARP funds intended to stimulate lending. If President Obama really wants to make changes in Washington, he needs to change this cozy relationship between the Federal Reserve System, the U.S. government, and the rich and powerful. And maybe he will. But by putting President Clinton's financial team in his administration, it does not seem likely. It seems he will do as the past presidents since Woodrow Wilson have done: protect the system, not change it.
Reader comments.
I must say that reading your first chapter has opened my eyes. I am only 23 years old and never fully understood what the Federal Reserve System was or what it did for our country. I have to say that it does not shock me. I am truly grateful that you have been honest and are not afraid to give the truthful definition of what a lot of things mean and stand for. It is, however, truly sad that taxpayers are affected by this, and a lot of them do not even know or understand it. Jacqueline.
We hear the media speak of the Fed as if it is some mystical behemoth, when in reality it is not what the general public thinks that it is. I had no clue that this was not a government or bank institution. It really worries me that this entity has almost limitless power with the lack of true oversight. The question becomes, how do they rise to such a prominent position? K. Thompson 5.
By some estimates, the combined worldwide losses in commodities, stocks, bonds, and real estate are greater than $60 trillion. So far, the world's banks and governments have put up nearly $10 trillion in efforts to fix the problem. What about the other $50 trillion? Who will cover those losses? Where did that money go? Who will bail us out, the people who really lost money and now must pay for our own losses and the losses of the rich via bailout money paid for with our tax dollars? The year 2013 will mark the 100th anniversary of the Federal Reserve System. For nearly 100 years, the Fed has pulled off the biggest cash heist in the world. This cash heist is a bank robbery where the robbers do not wear masks, but rather business suits with American flag pins in the jacket lapels. It is a robbery where the rich take from the poor via our banks and our government. While a student sitting in Dr. Buckminster Fuller's class in 1981, I was disturbed to hear him say, "The primary purpose for government is to be a vehicle for the rich to get their hands into our pockets." Although I did not like what he was saying, because I only wanted to think great things about my country and its leaders, deep down inside of me, and based on my own experiences, I knew there was some truth in what he was saying. Until that time, I had my own secret doubts about government. As a child, I often wondered why the subject of money was not taught in school. As a Marine pilot in Vietnam, I wondered why we were fighting the war. I also witnessed my dad resign his position as superintendent of education to run for lieutenant governor of the state of Hawaii because he was very deeply disturbed by the corruption he found in government. An honest man, my dad could not stomach what he witnessed after he became a high-ranking government official, a member of the governor's staff. So although Dr. Fuller's words were not words I wanted to hear, because I do love my country and do not like criticizing it, his words were disturbing enough to become my wake-up call. In the early 1980s, my study began, and my eyes were open to facts that many powerful people do not want us to see. How does this affect me? In the big picture of personal finance, there are three financial forces that cause most people to work hard and yet struggle financially. They are, number one, taxes. Number 2, debt. Number 3, inflation. Take a moment and reflect briefly on how much these three forces affect you personally. For example, how much do you pay in taxes? Not only do we pay income tax, but also sales taxes, gasoline taxes, real estate taxes, and so forth. More important, to whom do our tax dollars go and for what causes? Next, how much does the interest on debt cost you? For example, how much does interest on debt cost you on mortgage payments, car payments, credit cards, and college loans? And then, take a moment to think about how much inflation has affected your life. You may recall that not too long ago, people began flipping houses because prices were going up so rapidly. During that same period, the prices of gasoline, a college education, food, clothing, and more were climbing steadily. But incomes weren't. Many people did not save because it was smarter to spend today rather than pay more tomorrow. That was inflation in action. It is important to understand that these forces of taxes, debt, and inflation are kept alive by the Federal Reserve System's license to print money. Prior to the Federal Reserve, Americans paid very little in taxes. There was neither national debt nor much personal debt, and there was very little inflation. Here is a brief and simple explanation of the relationship between the Fed and these three forces. Number 1, taxes. America was relatively tax-free in its early days. In 1862, the first income tax was levied to pay for the Civil War. In 1895, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that an income tax was unconstitutional. In 1913, however, the same year the Federal Reserve System was created, the 16th Amendment was passed, making an income tax permanent. The reason for the reinstatement of the income tax was to capitalize the U.S. Treasury and Federal Reserve. Now the rich could put their hands in our pockets via taxes permanently. Number 2, debt. The Federal Reserve System gave politicians the power to borrow money rather than raise taxes. Debt, however, is a double-edged sword that results in either higher taxes or inflation. The U.S. government creates money rather than raising taxes by selling U.S. bonds, IOUs from the taxpayers of the country that eventually have to be paid for with higher taxes, or by printing more money, which creates inflation. Number 3, inflation. This is caused by the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury borrowing money or printing money to pay the government's bills. That's why inflation is often called the silent tax. Inflation makes the rich richer, but it makes the cost of living more expensive for the poor and the middle class. This is because those who print money receive the most benefit. They can purchase the goods and services they desire with the new money before it dilutes the existing money pool. They reap all of the benefits and none of the consequences. All the while, the poor and the middle class watch as their buck gets stretched thinner and thinner.
Reader comments.
Living in Zimbabwe, which has had the highest inflation in the world, I have come to understand the added advantage of not keeping money, currency. Basically, the price of a good changed 3 times in one day, and there was need to lock down the value in the morning and resell the product in the evening, which meant a nice profit. Dr. Taffy.
I think the most evil of the three is inflation. It affects the poor and the middle class equally. The middle class pay more taxes than the poor, but everyone pays equally through inflation. Cami 12.
The beginning of the end. I started this chapter with an important date, August 6, 2007. That was the day that American Home Mortgage, one of America's largest mortgage providers, filed for bankruptcy. The reason this date is important is because it marked the point where debt had gone too far. The global system could not absorb any more debt. On August 6, 2007, the debt bubble burst, and today we have deflation. which is a much more serious problem than inflation, something we'll go over in more depth in future chapters. To save the world, President Obama has to stop deflation. The primary tool he has for fighting deflation is inflation. This means he will have to employ massive amounts of debt and print more money out of thin air. And ultimately, this means higher taxes, debt, and if he is successful, inflation. Think of the global economy as a big hot air balloon. Things were going along splendidly until August 6, 2007, when too much hot air, debt, caused a tear in the balloon. As the horrifying ripping sound spread, central banks of the world began pumping more and more hot air, debt, into the balloon in an attempt to keep it from crashing to the ground and causing a depression. In his book, A Tale of Two Cities, Charles Dickens famously wrote, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness." Amazingly, things have not changed much since Dickens wrote that in 1859. For some people, deflation makes these the best of times. The cost of living is going down as the prices of oil, real estate, stocks, and commodities drop, and thus become more affordable. Apparently, Walmart isn't the only one rolling back prices. The central banks and governments of the world, hoping people, businesses, and governments will get deeper into debt by borrowing more money, are pumping trillions of dollars into the economy at interest rates near zero, virtually free money. Holders of massive pools of money are waiting like vultures for the right moment to flood back into the market and pick clean the bones of dead and dying companies. For well-positioned investors, this is the opportunity of a lifetime to snatch up assets at a discount. For well-positioned businesses, now is the time to gain market share as their competition goes under due to bankruptcy. These people see abundance. For others, these are the worst of times. The cost of living may be going down, but these people are unable to reap the benefits because they no longer have a job to cover even their basic living expenses, or they are so saddled with debt that they owe more money than their assets are worth, and the assets they have are really liabilities, such as their houses. The central banks of the world are flooding the system with money, but it is not helping these people because they cannot get loans for cars or houses. As the money supply blows up like a balloon, their access to that money shrinks. These people do not see the opportunity of a lifetime. They do not have pools of money waiting for the right deal. They see scarcity and feel fear. Many wonder if they will lose their jobs, homes, savings, and retirement if they haven't already. The difference between those who find it to be the best of times and those who find it to be the worst of times is simply knowledge and financial IQ. The great failure of our education system is that it does not teach people about how money really works, and what it does teach is antiquated and obsolete, the old rules of money. They teach you how to balance a checkbook, but they don't teach you how to grow a balance sheet, or even read one for that matter. They teach you to save your money, but they don't teach you about inflation and how it steals your wealth. They teach you how to write a check, but they don't teach you the difference between assets and liabilities. One wonders if the system is intentionally designed to keep you in the dark. In today's world, you can be an academic genius, but still be a financial imbecile. This goes against the conventional wisdom, especially when we equate people who have high-paying jobs, like attorneys or doctors, with being financially and academically smart because they make a lot of money. But as we've seen, making lots of money doesn't mean you are financially intelligent, especially when you spend and invest that money unwisely or turn your money over to people who do not care if you make or lose money. Always remember there is a big difference between job security and financial security, and true financial security requires a sound financial education based on the realities of the real world of money. That is why I was not surprised when our economic crisis spread wider than just the mortgage defaults of subprime borrowers. The talking heads and our leaders appeared to be surprised. That is why our presidential candidates did not mention the problem during the campaign. They towed the line for as long as they could, assuring us that there was no crisis and that our financial problems were limited to poor people not paying their mortgages. As we now know, the problem was not just poor people with too much debt. The problem started at the highest levels of government and finance. Millions have lost much of what they spent their lives working for because they have no understanding of the new rules of money and how they affect our lives. And that is a systemic problem that can't be solved by one charismatic politician. So here we come back to the question posed in the title of this chapter: Can Obama save us? The correct question should be, how can we save ourselves? The answer, and the key to our freedom from the tyranny of our economy, is knowledge. By educating yourself about money and how it works, you unlock the potential within yourself to break free from the mentality of scarcity and see the abundance all around you. For you, these truly can be the best of times. Personally, I do not expect government or big business to save me. I simply watch what the powers that be actually do, more than what they say or promise, and I respond accordingly to those actions. Knowing how to respond rather than follow, and taking confident action rather than waiting to be told what to do, requires courage and financial education. I believe our financial problem is too big and getting bigger. It is out of control. It is a monetary problem more than a political problem. It is a global problem, not just a U.S. problem. There is only so much Obama can do, and what he can do, I fear, may not be enough. Worst of all, the people really pulling the strings in the financial world do not answer to the President of the United States. They do not need his approval to do what they do. They are beyond the control of world governments and their elected leaders. How can we save ourselves? When I am asked what I would teach if I were in charge of financial education for our school system, my answer is, I would make sure the students understood the relationship between taxes, debt, and inflation before leaving the school system. If they understand that, they will have a more secure financial future. They would be able to make better financial decisions for themselves, rather than expect the government or so-called financial experts to save them.
Reader comment.
Because of things that I learned through financial education, I have known for a long time that my 401k was not the great investment it was touted to be, and today I'm better for having that knowledge. I'm reminded of something else Robert said, which is, it's not silver, gold, or real estate that make you rich. It's what you know about silver, gold, or real estate that makes you rich. D.A. Firebreather.
Ultimately, this audiobook is about the relationships between taxes, debt, and inflation. These form the foundation for the new rules of money. This audiobook will equip you to take control of your own financial future by giving you the knowledge necessary to understand the forces of taxes, debt, and inflation, and thus the new rules of money. And once you understand these things, you will be in a position to opt out of the conspiracy of the rich and to live a life of true financial freedom. Chapter 2: The Conspiracy Against Our Education. Why Money is Not Taught in School. Here is a quote from G. Edward Griffin in The Creature from Jekyll Island on Rockefeller's General Education Board, founded in 1903. The purpose of the foundation, the General Education Board, was to use the power of money not to raise the level of education in America, as was widely believed at the time, but to influence the direction of that education. The object was to use the classroom to teach attitudes that encourage people to be passive and submissive to their rulers. The goal was, and is, to create citizens who were educated enough for productive work under supervision, but not enough to question authority or seek to rise above their class. True education was to be restricted to the sons and daughters of the elite. For the rest, it would be better to produce skilled workers with no particular aspirations other than to enjoy life. The New School. I was 9 years old when my suspicions about school began. At the time, My family had just moved across town to a new home in order for my dad to be nearer his place of work. I was going to start the 4th grade at a new school. We lived in the little plantation town of Hilo on the Big Island of Hawaii. The main industry of the town was sugar, and about 80% to 90% of the population was descended from Asian immigrants brought to Hawaii in the late 1800s. I myself am 4th-generation Japanese American. At my old elementary school, most of my classmates looked like me. At my new school, 50% of my classmates were white, the other half Asian. Most of the kids, white or Asian, were rich kids from well-to-do families. For the first time, I felt poor. My rich friends had nice homes in exclusive neighborhoods. Our family lived in a rented home behind the library. Most of my friends' families had 2 cars. My family had 1. A number of those families had second homes on the beach. When my friends had birthday parties, they were held at the yacht club. My birthday parties were at a public beach. When my friends began playing golf, they took lessons from the pro at their country club. I didn't even own golf clubs. I was a caddy at the country club. My rich friends had new bicycles. Some even had their own sailboats. And they took vacations to Disneyland. My mom and dad promised we would someday go to Disneyland, but we never did. We had fun taking day trips to the local national parks to watch volcanoes erupt. It was at my new school that I met my rich dad's son. At the time, he and I were in the bottom 10% of the class economically, and occasionally academically. We became best friends because we were the poorest kids in the class and stuck together. The hope of education. In the 1880s, my ancestors first began emigrating to Hawaii from Japan. They were sent off to work in the fields of the sugar and pineapple plantations. Initially, their dream was to work the fields, save money, and return to Japan as rich people. My relatives worked very hard on the plantations, but the pay was low. On top of that, the owners of the plantations took money from the workers' paychecks to pay the rent for the houses that the plantation provided. The plantation also owned the only store, which meant workers had to purchase their food and supplies at the plantation store. At the end of the month, there was very little money left in their paychecks after rent and store charges were taken out. My relatives wanted to get off the plantation as soon as possible, and to them a good education was their ticket out. From stories I've been told, my ancestors scrimped and saved to send their kids to school for a college education. The lack of a college education meant you were stuck on the plantation. By the 2nd generation, most of my relatives were off the plantation. Today, my family boasts several generations of college graduates, most with at least a bachelor's degree, many with master's degrees, and a number with PhDs. I am on the low end of my family's academic poll. I only have a bachelor's of science degree, a BS degree. The school across the street. Changing schools at the age of 9 was a significant event in my life because of the new school's location. Directly across the street from my new school, Riverside School, was Hilo Union School. Hilo Union School was the school for the kids whose parents worked for the plantations, many of whom belonged to the labor union. Riverside School, on the other hand, was for the kids whose parents owned the plantations. In the 4th grade, I began attending Riverside School with the kids of plantation owners. In the 1950s, while walking to Riverside School, I would look across the street at Hilo Union School and see a school not segregated by race, but by money. This is when my suspicion of school and the educational process began. I knew something was wrong, but I did not know what. If our home wasn't on the same side of the street as Riverside School, I might have gone to Hilo Union School instead. From grade 4 through grade 6, I went to school with the kids who were the descendants of the plantation owners, the people and system my relatives wanted to escape from. All through elementary school, I grew up with these kids in school, played sports with them, and went to their homes. Once elementary school was over, many of these friends were sent off to boarding schools. I went on to the public junior high school farther up the street. There, I joined the kids from across the street, the kids from Hilo Union School. and I grew more aware of the differences between kids raised in rich families and those raised in poor and middle-class families. My dad was highly educated and the head of the educational system in Hawaii. Not only did he make it off the plantation, but he was also very successful as a government employee. Although my dad went to school, had advanced degrees, and had a good job that paid well, as a family we were still financially poor, at least compared to the families of my rich friends. Every time I went to my rich friends' homes, I knew something was missing, but I did not know what. At the age of 9, I began to wonder why going to school did not make my mom and dad rich. The plantations. My relatives worked and scrimped to save for a good education so that their kids could get off the sugar plantation. I saw the relationship between Riverside School and Hilo Union School, and I experienced having rich friends who are descendants of plantation owners and having friends who were descendants of plantation laborers. In elementary school, the basic education is the same, yet something is missing even today. My relatives wanted their kids to get off the plantation. The problem was, and is, that in school we never learned how to own the plantation. So many of us go on to work for the new plantation, the big corporations of the world, the military, or the government. We go to school to get a good job. We are taught to work for the rich, shop at the stores of the rich, borrow money from the banks of the rich, invest in the businesses of the rich via mutual funds and our retirement plans, but not how to be rich. Many people do not like hearing they are taught by our school system to be caught in the web of the conspiracy of the rich. People do not like to hear that the rich have manipulated our system of education. Hijacking the education system. One of the greatest sins of our current educational system is that it does not teach you about money. Rather, it teaches you how to be a good employee and to know your station in life. Some would say this is by design. For instance, in his book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, Griffin quotes from the first occasional paper of the General Education Board, entitled The Country's School of Tomorrow, written by Frederick Gates. In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present educational conventions fade from our minds, and, unhampered by tradition, we work our own good upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. For the task we set before ourselves is a very simple as well as a very beautiful one: to train these people as we find them to a perfectly ideal life just where they are. Keep in mind that the General Education Board was founded in 1903 by the Rockefeller Foundation, one of the most powerful and wealthiest foundations of its time. What we see here is an attitude that dates back over 100 years. One of the elite rich of the United States and even the world seemingly orchestrating education curriculum to meet their needs, and not necessarily the needs of the student. This is important today because although these attitudes are over a century old, they have not gone away, and they are the driving force behind your education, my education, and the education of your children. And they are the driving force behind the suppression of financial education even today. You do not need to know about money when you are destined to simply be a cog in someone else's money machine, or a worker on someone else's plantation. After reading Dr. Fuller's Grunch of Giants in 1983, I began to understand why the subject of money is not taught in schools. Up until then, I did not have the courage to criticize the school system. After all, my father was the head of the education system in Hawaii. As the years went by, however, I began to run into others who had similar views on education and why schools do not teach us much about money. One of the first people I came across who shared my suspicions about education is John Taylor Gatto, author of, among other books, Weapons of Mass Instruction and Dumbing Us Down. Mr. Gatto was named New York City Teacher of the Year 3 times, and also New York State Teacher of the Year. In 1991, he quit the teaching profession in an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal, saying, "I can't teach this way any longer. If you hear of a job where I don't have to hurt kids to make a living, let me know. Come fall, I'll be looking for work. He brought to my attention that our current system of education comes from the Prussian system, a system designed to create good employees and soldiers, people who blindly follow orders, waiting to be told what to do, including what to do with their money. As Mr. Gatto said to me recently, the school system was not designed to teach children to think for themselves, nor was it developed to just support the present-day notion that we can all be free. In actuality, our current school system is based on a Prussian model that was developed to do just the opposite, to teach children to obey orders and do as they're told. Compliant and obedient students become employees who are content to work for the rich, or become soldiers who sacrifice their lives to protect the wealth of the rich. You can find out more about John Taylor Gatto at his website, johntaylorgatto.com. He continues to commit his life to educational reform. Now, you may or may not believe that there was an intentional conspiracy against teaching about money in the school system. But what you cannot deny is that our schools should receive a failing grade when it comes to financial education. Whether purposefully or not, our system's lack of teaching and instruction on money is a driving force behind the financial oppression many people in our country face today. It is the lack of financial education that has so many highly educated people worried about today's global financial crisis. There are millions of people who have lost their retirement savings following the advice of financial salespeople. Too many people's eyes glaze over when they're forced to talk about their finances.
Reader comment.
I agree with what you're saying, Robert. I taught primary school children for 30 years before I resigned. I was frustrated by the education system. I felt that we set up our youngsters to fail because we were educating them mainly in things that do not equip them for life. The ancient Greeks believed in teaching people to think. We train our young to do as they are told. Henry 54.
Exchanging freedom for money. If people do not learn about money, they can end up exchanging their freedom for a paycheck, for a steady job and enough money to pay their bills. Some people spend their lives in constant fear of being fired. That is why, for millions of well-educated workers, job security is more important than financial freedom. For instance, when I was in the Marine Corps, I had the sense that some of my fellow pilots wanted to stay in the service for 20 years, not to fight for our country, but to receive a government paycheck for life. In the world of academia, many teachers dream of the security of tenure more than the pride of teaching. The lack of financial education in our schools has resulted in millions of free people who are willing to let the government take more control over their lives. Because we do not have enough financial intelligence to solve our own financial problems, we expect the government to do it for us. In the process, we surrender our freedom and give the government more and more control over our lives and our money. Every time the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury bail out a bank, we are not helping the people. We are protecting the rich. A bailout is welfare for the rich. With each bailout, we surrender more of our financial freedom, and our share of public debt grows and grows. Big government taking over our banks and solving our personal financial problems through government programs such as Social Security and Medicare is a form of socialism. I believe socialism makes people weaker and keeps them weak. In Sunday school, I was taught to teach people how to fish, not to give people fish. To me, welfare and bailouts are the purest form of giving people fish instead of teaching them how to provide for themselves. Taxes, debt, and inflation. As stated in Chapter 1, the three main forces that keep people struggling financially are taxes, debt, and inflation. I also stated that these three forces are directly connected to the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury. Again, once the Federal Reserve was allowed to print money and increase the national debt, taxes and inflation had to rise. Saying it another way, weakening people financially via taxes, debt, and inflation allows for a government's greater consolidation of power. When people are struggling financially, they are more willing to have the government save them, unwittingly exchanging their personal freedom for financial salvation. In 2009, the percentage of Americans who own their homes is dropping. Mortgage foreclosures are at all-time highs. The number of middle-class families is dropping. Savings accounts are smaller if they exist at all. Family debt is greater. The number of people officially below the poverty line is rising. The number of people who are working beyond the age of 65 is increasing. Bankruptcy is going through the roof, and many Americans do not have enough money to retire. But this is not just a U.S. phenomenon. This is a worldwide personal financial crisis. The conspiracy of the rich affects every nation and all people of the world. Regardless of whether you subscribe to a conspiracy, the facts remain that today the world is in the biggest financial crisis in history, and people are looking for the government to save them. And regardless of whether you subscribe to a conspiracy, the fact remains that most people leave school without much knowledge about money, taxes, debt, inflation, and how these financial forces affect their lives. Who took my money? Take a moment to consider the financial realities many of us live with. Realities. How they apply to rich and poor. School. Most people learn nothing about money at school. The rich learn about money at home. Job. Most people get a job working for the rich. Taxes. Taxes go to the companies that are owned by the rich and friends of political leaders in the form of bailouts. It is estimated that for every $1,000 in taxes you and I pay, less than $200 comes back as a benefit to us. The rich know how to play the system. They own the businesses, make more money, and pay a lower percentage in taxes than employees do. National debt. When the government talks about trillion-dollar bailouts, it means that for generations to come, our kids will be paying for these financial rescues of the rich. Our kids will pay for these bailouts and higher taxes and higher inflation. House. Mortgage payments go to the banks of the rich. If you take out a $100,000 mortgage at 5% for 30 years, you will pay $93,000 in interest alone. This does not include fees, commissions, and service charges. Retirement. Most people invest in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds for their retirement. Most of this money is invested in businesses of the rich. If the investment loses money, you lose money, and the financial planner, stockbroker, or real estate broker keeps the commission. Cost of living. Who gets the money we spend for insurance, gasoline, telephone service, electricity, and other necessities of life? The rich. Who benefits if these necessities go up in price? The rich.
Reader comment.
I have noticed a real difference in the medical treatment between the social classes. You either have to be rich, self-insured or insurance provided, or very poor, free government care, to get treatment. I would be curious as to how many small business owners and entrepreneurs are actually affording good insurance, not just some catastrophic plan. I believe the majority of people stay in a job they hate and never take the risks required to start their own business because of fear of losing health insurance for their family. Brian P.
The biggest lies about money. My poor dad was a great man, an educated, hard-working, honest-to-a-fault teacher and public servant. Yet, when it came to money, he was a liar. When he talked about work, teaching, and life, he often said statements like, "I'm not interested in money," or "I'm not doing it for the money," or "Money is not that important." Every time I heard him make such statements, I would shake my head. To me, these were lies. One day I asked him, "If you're not interested in money, why do you accept a paycheck? Why do you often say, 'I'm not paid what I'm worth'? Why do you look forward to a pay raise?" He had no reply. Like my dad, many people are uncomfortable with the subject of money. Many people lie or live in denial about the importance of money in their life. It is often said, never discuss sex, money, religion, or politics. These subjects are too volatile and primal in nature. That is why most people talk about the weather, sports, what is on TV, or the latest diet fad. These things are superficial. We can live with or without them. We cannot live without money. Many people subscribe to the saying we discussed in the introduction of this audiobook: the love of money is the root of all evil. What they fail to recognize is that in the context of that saying, money itself is not the root of all evil. Many people believe that money has the power to corrupt, and it can. Many people believe that if kids knew how to make money, they might not want to get a good education, and that too is possible. Yet living life takes money, and earning money is one of the facts of life. Most people spend most of their waking hours, and hence their lives, working for money. Many divorces and family breakups are caused by arguments about money. Keeping people ignorant about money is evil because many people do evil things for money, such as work at a job they do not like, work for people they do not respect, marry people they do not love, take what is not theirs, and expect someone else, like their family or the government, to take care of them when they are capable of taking care of themselves. Obsolete ideas. The idea that money is not important is an obsolete idea.
Reader comment.
King Solomon, circa 850 to 900 BC, the wisest and wealthiest man of his age, wrote in Ecclesiastes, chapter 10, verse 19, "A feast is made for laughter. Wine will make you merry, but money answers all things." Dr. M.L. Nichols.
In very simplistic terms, humans have evolved through 4 basic societal ages. They are: Number 1, the hunter-gatherer age. In prehistoric times, money was not important. As long as you had a spear, nuts, berries, a cave, and a fire, your needs were met. Land was not important because humans were nomads and followed the food. People lived in tribes with very little hierarchy. The chief did not live that much better than anyone else. During this age, there was only one class of people, and money was not important. Number 2, the agrarian age. Once humans learned how to grow crops and domesticate animals, land became important. Barter was the medium of exchange. Money was not important because even if you didn't have it, you could still survive. During this era, kings and queens ruled the land. The peasants who used the land paid taxes in the form of crops and animals to the family that controlled the land. The word real estate literally grew from the term royal estate. That is why we still use the word landlord in reference to the person to whom we pay our rent. During this age, there were 2 classes of people, the royals and the peasants. Number 3, the industrial age. I believe the industrial age began in the 1500s. Christopher Columbus, seeking an ocean passage to Asia, defied the idea that the world was flat. Columbus was not looking for the new world, as many schools teach. He was looking for trade routes for resources, like gold, copper, rubber, oil, lumber, furs, spices, industrial metals, and textiles, which were essential to the industrial age. People moved off the farms and moved into the cities, causing a whole new world of problems and opportunities. In the industrial age, rather than the peasants paying the king, the new capitalists paid the employee. Instead of land, the new capitalists owned corporations. Corporations were formed primarily to protect the rich, their investors, and their money. For example, before a ship sailed for the New World, the rich formed a corporation. If the ship was lost and sailors died, the rich were not responsible for the loss of life. All the rich lost was their money. Today, it is more of the same. If a CEO runs the company onto the rocks, loads the company with excessive debt, pays the executives millions in salaries and bonuses, or steals the employees' retirement funds, the employees lose everything, but the rich are often protected from the losses and liabilities, even the crimes. Even during the industrial age, money was not important. That's because the rule of thumb between employee and employer was a job and paycheck for life, job security and financial security. For people of my parents' generation, money was not important because they had company and government pensions, a house that was paid for, and savings in the bank. They did not need to invest their money. All that changed in 1974 when the U.S. Congress passed the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. This led to what we know as a 401k, IRA, KEO, and other retirement plans. In 1974, money became important, and people had to learn to manage their own money or die poor, living on Social Security, as my dad did after he lost his government job. Number 4, the information age. We live in the information age. In the information age, money is important. More specifically, knowledge about money is essential in the information age. The problem is, our educational system is still in the industrial age, and in the minds of most intellectuals and academics, money is not important. Most of these people are operating on old, outdated, and obsolete ideas of money. But money is important. Today, money is a key aspect of life. Today, financial security is more important than job security.
Reader comment.
Up until very recently, I have always equated job security with financial security. I never thought about it any other way than that. Now I know better. James BZC.
Financial education. Today, it is essential to have 3 different types of education. They are: number 1, academic education. This includes the ability to read, write, and solve basic math problems. In the information age, one's ability to keep up with changing information is more important than what one learned yesterday. Number 2, professional education. This is knowledge of a trade in which to earn money. For example, one goes to medical school to become a doctor, or to a police academy to join the police force. Today, it takes much more professional education to be financially successful. In the information age, professional education is essential to job security. Number 3, financial education. Financial education is essential to financial intelligence. Financial intelligence is not so much about how much money you make, but how much money you keep, how hard your money works for you, and how many generations you pass your money on to. In the information age, financial education is essential to financial security. Most school systems do a pretty good job with academic and professional education. They fail when it comes to financial education. Why financial education is important in the information age. We also live in a world of information overload. Information is everywhere. On the internet, TV, radio, magazines, newsletters, computers, cell phones, schools, businesses, churches, billboards, and so on. Education is essential to processing all of this information. That is why financial education is important. Today, financial information is coming at us from all directions. Without financial education, a person is less able to process financial information into personal meaning. For example, when someone says a stock has a PE of 6, or that a piece of real estate has a cap rate of 7%, what does that mean to you? Or when a financial planner says the stock market goes up an average of 8% a year, what does that make you think? Maybe you ask, is that information true? And is 8% a year a good or bad return? Again, without education, a person cannot translate information into personal meaning. Information without education is limited in value. This audiobook is dedicated to adding to your financial education by teaching you the new rules of money and how the new rules affect your life whether you realize it or not. New rule number 1. Money is knowledge. The first new rule of money is knowledge. Today, you do not need money to make money. You simply need knowledge. For example, if a stock is priced at $100 on some stock exchanges, you can short that stock, which means sell shares that you do not own. For instance, let's say I borrow 1,000 shares valued at $100 from the exchange, sell them, and put $100,000 in my account. Then, the stock falls to $65 and I go back to the exchange, purchase 1,000 shares for $65,000, return for a full refund the 1,000 shares I borrowed at $100 a share, and keep the $35,000 difference, less fees, commissions, and transaction costs. That is, in essence, what it means to short a stock. To make this money, all I needed was knowledge. First, I needed to know that the concept of short selling existed, and second, I needed to know how to use the method. I can do similar transactions in business and in real estate. As this audiobook progresses, I will use similar examples of money being made out of nothing but knowledge. Many of these examples will be real-life transactions that I've personally completed. And on top of these transactions, creating money out of nothing but knowledge, my returns were also higher, gained with much less risk than investing in mutual funds, and resulted in little to nothing in taxes. Today, in the information age, fortunes are won and lost in the blink of an eye, as a result of good or bad information. As most of you know, many people recently lost trillions of dollars due to bad advice, bad information, and a lack of financial education. The frightening thing is that most of those people who dished out the bad financial advice are still handing out that same bad information. A famous biblical quote is, "My people perish for lack of knowledge." Today, many people are perishing financially because they follow the old rules, such as save money and get out of debt. Or they believe investing is risky when it is the lack of financial education, experience, and bad financial advisors that is much more risky. Today, you can make money without money. You can also lose your savings in a blink of an eye. That is what I mean when I say money is knowledge.
Reader comments.
I would say that this notion is correct, but I would also state emphatically that action on knowledge is actually more important. That one knows how to short a stock or build a website or whatever does not necessarily translate into that person taking the actions necessary to create wealth. Ramas Art.
I would state the maxim in reverse, but the essence of this rule is that having the correct information is much better than simply having money. A rich man may need not fear being broke, for he knows the tactics that may be exercised in order to regain his wealth. Conversely, the man who holds a significant amount of money today may live in great uncertainty because he does not know how to increase his holdings through new skills, new information that he has been able to apply. D.L. Smith, 29.
In conclusion, it is bad enough that our schools do not teach students much, if anything, about money. But today, in 2009, many of the rich are fighting President Obama's economic stimulus plans to spend more on improving education. Only time will tell as to whether Obama's stimulus plan will work. But regardless, I do think spending more on education is vital to developing a strong economy, country, and free world. I am an advocate for education. In Asian culture, the most respected profession is the teacher. Yet in Western culture, teachers are the lowest paid of educated professionals. I believe that if we valued education like we say we do, we would pay our teachers more money and build better, safer schools in bad neighborhoods. To me, it is a crime that in America, our real estate taxes determine the quality of education a child receives. In other words, schools in poor neighborhoods receive less tax money than schools in rich neighborhoods. Talk about a conspiracy of the rich. I also believe that if we truly valued education, we would teach people financial literacy, because we would recognize that money is a central and important aspect of our existence. So while many so-called advocates of education deride my ideas, I simply ask, why continue advocating a system that is designed to create cogs instead of free thinkers, and a system designed to suppress financial knowledge rather than create financially literate people who can prosper in a capitalist system? Whether you believe as I do that there is a conspiracy in education, the fact remains that a sound education, one that includes financial education, is more important today than ever before. When I was a kid, if one of my classmates did not do well in school, he or she still could get a high-paying job working for the sugar plantation or a factory. Today, as factories close and jobs move overseas, a child who does poorly in school will probably do poorly in life. This is why the world needs better schools, safer schools, better paid teachers, and more financial education. In the information age, we are overloaded with data. Education gives us the power to translate that information into meaning we can use to make our lives better. Give us the power to solve our own financial problems rather than expect the government to solve our problems for us. Stop the bailouts and all the handouts. It is time to put an end to the conspiracy of the rich. It is time to teach us how to fish. Chapter 3. The Conspiracy Against Our Money. The bank never goes broke. The bank never goes broke. If the bank runs out of money, it may issue as much more as may be needed by merely writing on any ordinary piece of paper. Rules from the game of Monopoly. The day the dollar died. On August 15, 1971, the U.S. dollar died. On that day, without authorization from Congress, President Nixon severed the relationship between the U.S. dollar and gold, and the dollar became monopoly money. After that, the biggest economic boom in history began. Today, in 2009, as the global economy collapses, central bankers of the world are creating trillions of dollars, yen, pesos, euros, and pounds by following monopoly's rules for bankers. The problem is that monopoly is just a game. Applying monopoly's rules in real life is a recipe for the destruction of society as we know it. As the noted English economist John Maynard Keynes once said, "There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency." The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and it does it in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. Today, our economy is sick because the runaway printing presses of the Federal Reserve are flooding our monetary system with funny money that debauches our existing currency, and no one is able to diagnose the problem, just as Keynes warned so many years ago.
Reader comments.
Monopoly money. John Kenneth Galbraith once famously said, "The process by which banks create money is so simple that the mind is repelled." Hellspark.
I never knew that rule existed in Monopoly. Scary how true to life it is. The examples I think of are bank loans and credit cards. A. Joy Flower.
Money from nothing. One reason why people ignored the advice of Keynes, Nixon's 1971 change, and others on the destruction of money, is because debauching the currency suddenly made people feel rich. Credit cards came in the mail, and shopping became the national sport. Many in the middle class became pseudo-millionaires as their homes seemed to magically increase in value. They came to believe their retirement would be financed by profits in the stock market. People took out home equity loans to pay for family vacations. Rather than one car, families had a Mercedes, a minivan, and an SUV. Kids went to college and were strapped with student loans that take years to pay off. The middle class celebrated their newfound wealth by dining in fancy restaurants, dressing in designer clothes, driving Porsches, and living in McMansions, all financed by debt. We are now coming out of the biggest economic boom in history. The problem is that boom was caused by debt, not money, by inflation, not production, by borrowing, not working. In many ways, it was money for nothing, because money was nothing. As Keynes would say, our money was debauched. We looked rich, but society as we knew it was collapsing. After 1971, central bankers could create money by merely printing more paper. In today's digital age, bankers do not need paper to create money. As you listen to this, trillions of dollars, yen, euros, pesos, and pounds are being created electronically out of thin air. According to the rules of monopoly, you and I may go broke, but the banker never does. After all, the global game of monopoly must go on. Witnessing the change. In 1972, I was a Marine Corps pilot stationed on board an aircraft carrier off the coast of Vietnam. The war was not going well. We knew we were losing, but as Marines we could not dwell on that fact. As a Marine officer, my job was to keep my men positive and focused on living, and at the same time ready to give their lives for each other and our country. I could not let my men see my doubts and fears, and they did not let me see theirs. Keeping morale high was difficult, because we knew the tide of battle had turned against us. We also knew that we were losing the war at home. Every time we saw pictures of student protesters burning draft cards and the American flag, we began to question who was right and who was wrong. Some of the more popular rock songs of the era were songs against the war. The lyrics of one song went, "War, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing." Rather than let the song get us down, my crew and I would loudly shout that line as we flew into battle. For some strange reason, that song gave us the courage to do what we had to do, and to face the ultimate reality, death. The night before every mission, I would go up to the bow of the aircraft carrier, sit alone, and allow the wind to separate my thoughts from my fears. I did not pray to live. Instead, I asked that if the dawn was to bring my last day, I wanted to choose how I would face death. I did not want to die a coward. I did not want fear to dictate my life. That is why when I returned from the war, I did not seek job security. I did not let the fear of financial insecurity dictate my life. Instead, I became an entrepreneur. When I lost everything after my first business failed, I did not let fear, frustration, and doubt stop me from doing what I needed to do. I simply picked up the pieces and got back to work rebuilding my business. Learning from my business mistakes was the best business school I could have attended, and I am still in that school today. In recent years, while the stock and real estate markets were booming and fools were rushing in to invest, I did not let greed take over my logic. Today, during this economic crisis, I have the same fears as everyone else. However, I simply do not let fear stop me from doing what I must do. Rather than see only the crisis, I do my best to see the opportunities the crisis presents. That is a lesson I learned in the Vietnam War, and that, for me, was what war was good for. There was something else war was good for. The Vietnam War gave me a ringside seat to witness one of the biggest changes in world history, the change in the rules of money. A letter from home. In the war zone, mail call was the most important part of our day. Letters from home were treasured as a connection to the most important people in our lives. One day, I received a letter from my rich dad. I rarely heard from him because he was not my real dad. He was my best friend's father. Since the age of 9, my rich dad was like a second father to me, and he was my financial mentor. His note began in bold letters, "The rules of money have been changed." Further on in the letter, he advised me to read the Wall Street Journal and follow the price of gold. President Nixon took the United States off the gold standard in 1971, he explained, stating more than once that the price of gold was, at one time, fixed at $35 per ounce, but no longer. Once Nixon severed the link between the dollar and gold, gold's price started to rise. By the time I read his letter, gold was fluctuating from $70 to $80 an ounce. At the time, I had no idea what he was so excited about. When I was a kid, my rich dad rarely talked about gold, except to say that it backed our money. What that meant, and its significance, went over my young head. Yet, just by the tone in his letter I received that day in Vietnam, I knew he was excited about the change Nixon made. His message was simply this: with our dollars separated from gold, the rich were about to play games with money like the world had never seen before. He explained, as the price of gold goes up and down relative to the dollar, there will be the biggest booms and busts the world has ever seen. With gold separated from the dollar, we are entering a period of extreme financial instability. Inflation will go through the roof. The rich will get very rich, and others will be wiped out. He closed his letter with, "The dollar is now officially monopoly money, and the rules of monopoly are now the world's new rules of money." Again, I did not fully understand his message at the time, but now that I am older and wiser, I believe he was saying that this was his time to become very rich. This was the opportunity of his lifetime, and he was right. My rich dad became very rich while the economy boomed. My poor dad clung to job security and missed the biggest boom in history. Finally, reading the rules. A few days later, I went to the officers' lounge, found a well-worn game of Monopoly, and took up a game with a group of pilots. Since I had played the game countless times, I did not bother to reread the rules. But as the game went on, I recalled Rich Dad's words about the rules of Monopoly being the world's new rules of money. Thumbing through the rules book, I came across the rule Rich Dad referred to. It stated, "The bank never goes broke. If the bank runs out of money, it may issue as much more as may be needed by merely writing on any ordinary piece of paper." Today, thanks in part to my Rich Dad's simple warning, I know why we have a massive global financial crisis on our hands. For the rich and powerful, the rule change meant they could print money on any ordinary piece of paper. Our money had been debauched. Prior to 1971, our money was golden because it was backed by gold. Today, our money is toxic, making the people and businesses of the world very sick. It is like drinking polluted water and wondering why you feel ill. By changing the rules of money, the rich could legally steal our wealth via the money system itself. Real-life education begins. In 1972, I followed my rich dad's advice and read the Wall Street Journal religiously, looking for articles about gold. Thus began my education on gold and its relationship to money. I read every article I could find on the subject. But I didn't have to just read to learn these important lessons. Practical examples were on display all around me. One day I flew from my aircraft carrier to a small village outside of Da Nang, a major city in South Vietnam. Having a few hours to spend before we were scheduled to return to the ship, my crew chief and I walked into the village. He wanted to buy mangoes and papayas, exotic fruits we did not get back on the ship. After selecting an assortment of fruits, he reached into his flight suit pocket and pulled out a wad of piastre, the paper money of South Vietnam. "No, no, no," said the fruit vendor, waving her hand. She was letting us know she would not accept P, as the money was often called. My crew chief then pulled out a $50 bill and handed it to her. She reluctantly took the bill, scowling as she inspected the greenback suspiciously. Finally, she said, "Okay, you wait," and ran to another stall, transacted something, ran back, and handed my crew chief the bag of fruit. "What was that all about?" I asked my crew chief. "She's getting ready to run," he replied. "She's planning to leave the country." "How do you know?" I asked. "She is choosy about her money," he replied. "She knows her country's money, the piastre, is worthless. Nobody outside of South Vietnam will accept it. Why would anyone accept the money of a country that will soon no longer exist? She also knows the U.S. dollar is dropping in value as the price of gold rises. That's why she ran to the other stall to change my money for gold." Walking back to the helicopter, I said, "I noticed she gave you change in piastre." "I noticed that too," my crew chief said, smiling. "I have a bag of fruit and a pocket full of peas, and she has gold. She may be just a fruit vendor, but when it comes to money, she's no fool." 3 weeks later, my crew chief and I were flying north in search of an ancient gold mine, hoping to buy some gold. I thought that I could buy gold for a better price behind enemy lines. Risking my life and the lives of my crew, I found out that regardless of where I am in the world, the price of gold is the same. My real-world education in the new rules of money and the relationship between monopoly money and gold was underway. Public concern. In 2009, as the economy worsens, there will be growing unrest. Even now, people know something is wrong. The problem is that they don't know what is wrong exactly. Again, as John Maynard Keynes said, the process of debauching currency engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and it does it in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. Today, people do what they have been taught to do. They go to school, work hard, pay their bills, save, invest their money in mutual funds, and hope that things will return to normal. That is why everyone is clamoring for his or her share of the bailout. Few people realize that the root of our problem is our money, the very thing they work for and hang on to. Few people realize that those who control the money supply want us to need more and more of their toxic money. The more we need money, the more money they can print. The more we need money, the weaker we become. The more we need money, the more we're headed towards socialism. Rather than teaching people to fish, the government gives people fish, and people become dependent upon government to solve their money problems. Don't bank on it. Ironically, the world is looking to the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury to solve our money problem, even though those institutions are causing the problem. As we've discussed in this audiobook, the Federal Reserve is not federal, and it is not American. The Fed is owned by some of the richest families in the world. The Federal Reserve is a banking cartel, just as OPEC is an oil cartel. Few people realize it has no reserves because it has no money. It does not need a big vault to hold money. Why do you need to store money when monopolies' rules for bankers apply? The Federal Reserve Bank is not a bank. That idea is as illusionary as our money. Some people say the creation of the Federal Reserve was unconstitutional. They think the Fed's creation has harmed the world economy, and it has. There are others who say that the Federal Reserve System is the best thing that has ever happened to the world. They say that it has helped bring wealth to the world like never before. And it has. It does little good to question the motives of the Federal Reserve's founders. The reality is that today the Fed runs the game. Rather than ask what President Obama is going to do about the economic crisis, it is better to ask yourself, what am I going to do? Rather than ask if the $1 trillion stimulus package will work, it is smarter to ask yourself, where does that $1 trillion come from? Is it sitting in someone's vault? In very simple terms, the central banks of the world can only do two things. They are, number one, create money out of thin air, just like the rules of monopoly allow, something they are doing today by the trillions. And number two, lend money they do not have. When you borrow money from a bank, the bank does not need to have that money in the vault. The zero-sum game. Historically, every time governments have printed their own money, fiat money, that money eventually reverted to its true value, zero. That's because paper money is a zero-sum game. Will the same happen to the U.S. dollar, the yen, the peso, the pound, and the euro? Will history repeat itself? Now I can hear many proud red-blooded Americans saying, "This will not happen in America. Our money will never go to zero." Unfortunately, it already has, many times. During the Revolutionary War, the American government printed a currency known as the Continental. After the government printed too many Continentals, our money became a joke, giving birth to the phrase, "not worth a Continental." The same thing happened to the Confederate dollar. When I need a reminder of money going to zero, all I have to do is think about the woman fruit vendor in Vietnam and her aversion to the piastre. That was not that long ago. It's not ancient history. Today, the entire world is running on monopoly money. But what if the party is over? Will bailouts save us? Ironically, every time there is a bailout, our national debt grows bigger, we pay more in taxes, the rich get richer, and our money's value edges closer to zero. Every time our governments print more money, our money becomes less valuable. We work harder for less and less, and our savings are worth less and less. I'm not saying that today's monopoly money will go to zero. I'm not saying it won't either. Yet, if history does repeat itself, and if the U.S. dollar goes to zero, the worldwide chaos will be cataclysmic. It will be the biggest wealth transfer in world history. The rich will get richer, and the poor will most definitely get poorer. The middle class will be wiped out. Apocalypse Now. As our financial crisis grows worse, the secrets about the new rules of money are harder to keep. This crisis is leading us to a financial apocalypse. For many religious people, the word apocalypse is often used to refer to the end of the world. This is not the type of apocalypse I am referring to. The word apocalypse comes from the Greek word meaning lifting of the veil. It is a term applied to the disclosure of something hidden from the majority of humankind. Simply said, apocalypse means secrets are being revealed. If you read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you may recall the subtitle of the book was What the Rich Teach Their Kids About Money That the Poor and Middle Class Do